sponsor refugees in GTA with Lubna Bajali. Unfortunately, she's not here today. We have the addition of having her. And as Chris mentioned, we had more than 200 participants in the research in Ontario as a whole. But for this section, we had around 20 structured interviews, face-to-face interviews, including 50 sponsored refugees. So as you asked and as Chris mentioned, it was important for us to understand the type of contact the refugees had with their sponsors. So we categorized the interviews according to the type of contact they had. So within the 20 interviews, we had 8 interviews who had direct contact with their sponsors prior to arrival, regardless of how regular it was or how many times it happened. And we had 5 who had this type of indirect contact through mediators, whether they were related or unrelated, and 7 who had absolutely no contact. And as many of you have definitely heard, people who came and they knew that they were privately sponsored at the airport or even at the hotel. Someone shows up and say, "I'm your sponsor." They knew that they're privately sponsored, and at this point, they don't really know what private sponsorship means. So these were basically the interviews that we were looking at, and we have a sort of preliminary observations or findings regarding building trust prior to arrival, which is the focus of this research. The contact took place through between the sponsors and the sponsored refugees. The most used application was WhatsApp, in which there were those big WhatsApp groups, including volunteers, people who translate, sponsors, and the families. There were also emails were sort of contact on a lesser scale because it allowed use of Google Translate, and so translation was easier using emails. And but what we've seen as the most successful type of contact was through Skype or phone calls, in which translation was offered by volunteers, and this type of contact gave space and time for discussions, getting more information, and so on. Only one interview had Facebook, as Facebook was basically absent as a media of contact, but resettlement groups on Facebook were very vibrant, and unfortunately had lots of inaccurate and rumors about what life in Canada. And this was even the words of the refugees when they came here. They say, "We expected them to take our children. They told us that the schools are very bad." They had, they have this batch of rumors going on Facebook. So, as you said, our main focus was about the process of building trust prior to arrival, as refugees or sponsored refugees being individuals, and sponsors same wise as Chris mentioned. The way they interacted before arrival or didn't interact was important to us to highlight some of the key issues that affect them. So, Chris, we agreed that you would slow me down if we needed. So, okay. So, as we had those interviews, many of the, almost all during all the interviews, the participants mentioned that they wish they had more information about life and resettlement here, and but not just information. They said we got their orientation session, which was basically useless. We got the information through Facebook, but we needed more real information, realistic information about how to resettle. What does that mean? And we categorized these types of information needed in 4 or 5 categories. One was life and culture in Canada, and attitudes towards smoking, for example. Sponsorship programs, what are their types, what do they include, and how they can dilute a sponsorship agreement, laws and regulations Canada as a whole, and the availability and locations of services and degree certification and job market. These were basically the information that were highlighted through the interviews, but these were not only the but as we sorry but as we talked or through the interviews, we've noticed that this information were they recognized after coming here, and for those who had no contact when they were asked, but if you had the opportunity to know about this information before you come, would you ask about what would you ask about? They would say, those who had no contact, they would say that, oh, we didn't know what to ask about, we didn't understand what Canada means. Some of them didn't know where Canada exists, and so they thought that this type of connection would not bring them to information. But the ones who had real regular contact, they mentioned that at the beginning they didn't get this, they didn't have in mind what to ask, but as the conversation started and they got to know their sponsors, the sponsors got to know them, they would give some information, so they would ask, and from week to week, this information would intrigue more questions, and then they would ask in the further conversation or chats. So looking back at that, they said that they had very positive feelings regarding this conversation from the information side, that they helped them reduce the uncertainty they had about Canada. They said we were uncertain about everything, about our applications coming or not, what life looks like, and if we can manage or live there or not. But as these conversations developed, they got a better picture that they said helped us get prepared to resettling and integration. So this was like a key point for building this type of relationship between their refugees. On the other hand, the ones who did not have this type of contact really had a problem with their sponsor as they came by. We had two issues. The one who had the mediators in between, this helped them build trust, because they trusted, especially the one who had the relatives or people that they trust through network. They had this trust being present, but they didn't have. There was sort of a missing link, because they would ask their volunteers or their mediators questions, but they didn't get to know more information about the sponsorship program or their sponsors. So being very, very grateful, and this I've seen through all the participants, they had this type of gratitude toward all the process, even if they had real challenges, is that the ones who had this indirect contact with their sponsors, they were really embarrassed to ask questions. They had the volunteers in which they asked them some of the questions, but the volunteers didn't have all the picture. So this caused a sort of a missing link or miscommunication between the two parties. Although they had this positive relationship, but yet if you don't know what's your budget, how you're going to live, it gets you really stressed. And one of the cases, they had very, very nice ways, or like very sweet ways talking about their sponsors, but at the end, by the last month, the 12th month, they found that they have no more checks, and they didn't know how much they would get each month, what their sponsorship program, were their rights or what they had to do, and as they needed some medical support for their teeth, they had to give them a check, which was the last check they needed, and this information was not delivered to them, so they had the last month of their first year without money. Of course, this had financial inconvenience and lots of stress, but I mean, if you get into 1 year of sponsorship and you don't know they didn't know what their budget, they said we calculated back our budget when we finished the year. So it's really hard as a form of communication. but the ones who who didn't have this type of contact at all were they said that we came to Canada and we didn't have anything, and this really caused them struggle with all the life paths. So the other point is, which Chris highlighted, was acknowledging their life before refuge, because the information we're seeing that most of the information shared or exchanged are basically about Canada, about the refugees. The sponsors get the file of the family, and they know their ages, how many are they. Sometimes they call to ask about their sizes for the jackets for winter and so on. But mostly all the information shared about the refugees, mostly all the information shared are about the refugees or what they need to know about Canada. And there's little information shared about the sponsors themselves. So this was seen, although this was really in a 2 or 3 interviews that we had, the ones who managed to talk to their sponsors, to see photos of their families, to share this type of information, they were very excited about it, and they spoke about their sponsors as part of their family, their kids, and really have this type of communication between them. Also, one of those cases that I talked about is a case who had lots of delays in his application for known reason, and he got really frustrated and depressed. He had already sold his gave out his house, sold his furniture, and the application didn't come. So he was really depressed. But at that time, his sponsor managed to talk to him, and they had this type of regular contact. They said they would call me every Wednesday, and I would wait for this call because it made me feel better and it gave me hope that I'm going there. It reduced uncertainty, but they also talked a lot about themselves, and they asked questions about us. So this family really had a positive experience, and I remember the wife saying that when she entered the house, she could see that the sponsors were very thoughtful about them, and they could see themselves in every detail. Like, she knew about the kids, then she knew about the woman herself, her style, what she wears. And she said, even like I would open each wardrobe and I would be surprised. It was like a package. The house was a package of little gifts for me. So it wasn't in a material aspect. It was basically from a sense of thoughtfulness and consideration. And this, on the other hand, this was a very also a strong point from the mediator side, because the mediators help introduce the families better to the sponsors and do this type of communication, because the sponsor refugees wanted to know more about their sponsors, and the mediators were offered that and give this type of connection and relief. But on the other hand, the families who didn't have direct contact and were dealt with, as Chris said, as a group of refugees without any type of the understanding of what the sponsors were or where the refugees were. We have seen that for the people who had no contact, 2 out of the 7 interviewed had tried to form a dissolution of their agreement and leave those sponsors. So one of them said if we had a connection or communication pre-arrival, we would have had the time to know if we fit together as 2 families or not. So this was his perspective, that we are 2 families getting together for a year, and we needed to know if this would work or not. So this was basically the second point of acknowledgement of their life before refuge. And for and this also extended not just understanding their emotional needs, giving them support, but also we had cases in which the family had disabilities. We had a family where the two parents were disabled on wheelchair, although they were world champions in ping pong and athletics, and the family not knowing enough about it, and also one of the kids, they were family of 4, and the kid also had a Down syndrome. The family not knowing more about the family they are sponsoring, they were not prepared. So this family needed lots of support, physiotherapy, lots of medical support, training, and applying for equipment. They have been 7 years using wheelchairs, which are completely worn out. So they needed a certain type of preparation. And the fact that they came and the first time they knew about their sponsor were in the hotel in Hamilton after 1 week from their arrival, that they are privately sponsored. And also the family didn't know about their situation well. This caused like a series of frustrations all through the first 6 months that the refugee families went to the agency that formed this sponsorship, and they said that we don't trust them, we don't trust their translators, we don't trust anything that they do, and we want to leave this. We can't do this. And one of the parents told me that those 6 months were very, very depressing and stressful for me, that the only thing that kept me from leaving Canada was that the situation in Turkey was worse. So this was after living 6 months in Canada, and just for a lack of communication, of basic information about family. And the third thing that we thought was also crucial in this form of building trust was giving choices, as Chris mentioned, that the families who had the opportunity to see their houses, see options for houses, in terms of location, in terms of furniture, really felt respect and respected this from the refugees. They said that, when we were asked to give choices, we were okay for them to choose anything. We felt okay, they are considered enough and they would choose the best for us. And also, even if they didn't have the information, the sponsors who gave them the reasoning behind choices, as Chris mentioned, one of the families, he said that we were given 3 options for housing. One which was close to our family members, we had an extended family there. One was close to the sponsor, so they would come to us more, and one was closer to the Arab community. And then we chose the one which had more Canadian community and close to the sponsors to have this type of communication. And after 1 year, although they found this a bit hard for them being away from, like we had another situation in Scarborough where the sponsors chose a house for the family, and the family found that this house was very expensive for them. They had an income of $3,100, and the house rent was $2,500 with utilities. So they felt that all the money would go in rent, and they didn't accept that. They talked to their sponsor, we don't want that house, but the sponsor said this is the most appropriate, others are not clean, you are a big family, and they forced them into this house. And also this resulted in a series of complications and trying to leave those sponsors. So even when the father tried to find a solution and tried to work, he's a cook, he found a job in Scarborough, in Mississauga, and the sponsor again refused to let them leave because there are 5 ladies as sponsors, and it would be hard for them to communicate with them being in Mississauga and Scarborough. So this type of enforcement was really, really devastating for these families. Okay. So basically, these were the 3 points which I wanted to highlight through many, many examples. which are reducing uncertainty, acknowledging their lives before refuge, and giving choices. And we believe that all this will contribute to building a relationship between the two parties, and thus building this type of trust needed for period of time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We'll have questions for everybody, I think, at the end. Do you prefer that?
Yeah.
So we'll move quickly on to...
So just a clarification on the numbers, because you had mentioned 200, over 200 interviews. That's Ontario
Participants.
Participants.
And then in the GTA was around 50 or 20.
No, we had 50 participants from the sponsor refugee side, and I think 45
sponsors. So the 200 is the two phases of
okay.
the project.
Yes.
Two different projects.
So
So over to Arthur.
thank you.